Everyone, and welcome to our panel here in Panama, Resistance to Tobacco Harm Reduction. We'll be looking to tackle myths and alarmism spread by some so-called science, by media, and all of it pushing world policymakers in bad directions. I'm Will Godfrey. I'm joined by four prominent experts today. To my left, we have Chris Snowdon, a British journalist and author working with the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. Next to him we have Martin Cullip, a British advocate and international fellow with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Centre. And then we have Dr. Roberto Sussman, who's a distinguished physicist and THR advocate in Mexico. And at the end, Tim Andrews, an Australian now living in the States with Americans for Tax Reform and the Tholos Foundation. So I think we'll start with the nature of some of the problems before turning to the why and ultimately perhaps some potential solutions. And Roberto, I'll begin with you, if I may, since you're the only scientist among us. So we're talking about bad science, and I just wondered if you could give us a quick overview of what bad science is and how it's being produced in this field.
Well, it's bad science because it is subjected to an agenda based on regulation. The good approach would be that regulation follows the science, right? The science comes first, and then based on what you find in the science, you regulate. But what we are seeing is the opposite. There's a regulation that has already been decided, and science ends up acting as a fig leaf to justify this regulation. In a sense, what is the effect on publishing? When I say publishing, I mean authors, reviewers, editors, the press releases of the published papers and the way it is taken by the media and by society. It is like, suppose you're playing soccer, football soccer. The field is horizontal, right? That means that essentially it depends on the quality of the teams. Now take this field and make it like this, right? So those who are on top, they don't have to be good players. It's very easy for them to move the ball and to score goals. And those who are on the other side must be very good and very insistent players to have a goal, right? And this is what we see in areas that become very politicized. See, I work in theoretical physics. There is always politics, but politics is not so determinant. When I submit application for a project, it is judged by the technical merits. There is a component of personalities, egos, politics, whatever, but it is not the football field skewed like I described. In other sciences that become very politicized, especially public health. Public health has implications, interests, industries are involved, governments, bureaucracies. And so there is a tendency for it to become politicized. But and climate change is very similar, it's also very politicized. And, but there are two fields where science is extremely political. The research that is justifying the drug wars. It is conducted, for example, by the National Institute of Drug Addiction in the US. And it has to justify that the drugs are, it has a model of addiction as a mental disease, etc. It's a very politicized science. But I think that the most politicized science of all branches is the science around tobacco and nicotine. That science is extremely politicized. There is an agenda that opposes harm reduction, opposes. The reasons are complex. It would take me 1 hour to explain the way I understand these reasons, but there are political reasons. It's essentially a political issue, and science there, it is acting as a fig leaf, right? However, the community is divided because there is support for tobacco harm reduction among public health also. And you see it in the United Kingdom, in New Zealand, perhaps in some European countries, Canada, but the majority, the mainstream, is opposed to it. And you see it in the science. It's very easy. And here I can speak of my own research in the area, in aerosol physics and chemistry. We have made reviews of the literature. And we have found a lot of papers with a very deficient methodology. And of course, these papers claim that there are a lot of metals and chemical and toxins and so on. And we have seen that these papers are methodologically flawed. All papers that were conducted according to the accepted conditions of experimental quality. Experiments have their own quality conditions. All of them report negligible toxic content, right? And we see that a lot of papers that are very deficient, they get published very easy, right? And our reviews took a long time to publish because that's another point. The science has become very superficial. Like very few people, even among the scientists themselves, actually read the articles. And of course, the media only takes the title and they make big fuss about that. It has a big resonance box, but all this is part of the politicization of this science.
Thank you for that overview, Roberto. That leads us sort of neatly on to the next part of this, because of course it's not just the misinformation that's coming out through certain scientific papers, but the amplification of that by media, and also the twisting of some decent science among other forms of alarmism. Chris, obviously you're very familiar with the media landscape in this area. Would you similarly just be able to give us a kind of an overview of the problems that are occurring, patterns that you've seen, and perhaps naming some of the worst culprits?
Oh, naming, shaming. Hello. Whenever you see very bad science reported in the media, it's often worth asking where the problem really lay. Sometimes it can simply be that the study itself is rubbish, written by biased researchers. Sometimes you'll find actually that the study isn't too bad, or at least is couched in more moderate terms, but the press release from the journal is highly misleading, sometimes outright wrong. And sometimes you'll find it's a journalist has either got the wrong end of the stick, completely misunderstood the study, or has decided to sensationalize it. Or, unfortunately, you often get all three. You've got junk scientists producing terrible science, a press release that makes it even worse, and a journalist that makes it worse still again. And by the end of it, you've got something that is just categorically untrue on every level. What can you do about this? Well, there is a mountain of bad science coming out about e-cigarettes. Some of it is economics, some of it is toxicology, I suppose you might call it, but very often animal experiments using vast quantities of a chemical that isn't even in e-cigarettes in the first place. And then you have sort of epidemiological claims, for example, the gateway effect claim. And these studies are come out at an incredible rate of knots. It's as if the politicians are expected to judge science by the quantity produced rather than the quality. And unfortunately, they very often will do that. They'll say, well, you've got some studies here showing that e-cigarettes are a gateway from smoking, that they're 99% safe or what have you. But I've got all these studies here, which have then been put into systematic reviews and meta-analyses and so on. So at that level, if the problem primarily lies with the academics, realistically, it's for other academics to critique that. You can write a rapid response very often to the journal. You can write a letter to the journal. You can try and replicate the findings. This is all quite labor-intensive stuff. Scientists haven't got a lot of time to go around critiquing other people's articles. Very often the problem is the same again and again and again. So, for example, gateway studies just have this intractable problem, which you'll always appear to find a gateway effect because you cannot adjust for personality types, basically. And so scientists, quite understandably, have got other things to be doing. They've got their own fields of research. They don't want to spend the whole time getting into the trenches with people like Stanton Glantz, if we're naming names. We are very lucky, I think, that there are certain people who are have incredible stamina for this kind of thing. Brad Radu, Clyde Bates, Peter Hayek, our own Konstantinos, and a handful of others will keep pursuing these things, and now and again have managed to get studies retracted. And this obviously all helps. If the problem lies with the media, and I have to say, I think in this particular area, it actually more often lies with the researchers than it does with the media. The media will always amplify and get things wrong, but the fundamental problems usually lie with the researchers themselves and their own agendas. But if the media gets something wrong, yeah, you can. I mean, all I do as a writer and a blogger and a tweeter is write and blog and tweet about these things. And you can hope that you might shame individual journalists into doing a better job next time. It's very difficult to measure your impact when you're doing these things on a regular basis over a period of years, but I would like to think that it helps to some extent. You're not going to get a retraction from a tabloid newspaper very often. Usually these things are not libelous, which is all newspapers really care about. They don't mind being factually incorrect. It's not illegal to be factually incorrect. But it might help them not make the same mistake quite so bad next time, perhaps, or at least not publish a story. Very often a win is just not publishing something, and you'll get journalists go like, I've seen this kind of thing before. This is not a serious piece of work. We just won't give it the oxygen and publicity. That in itself is a win. So, I mean, as we were saying in a session yesterday, it's an uphill battle because there's not that many scientists in particular who have time on their hands to be dealing with this kind of thing, and the amount of nonsense out there is effectively infinite. But I do believe that we can all make a difference by making a noise in whatever way we can when we see false claims. And over time, I would hope that we will build up a realistic sense amongst journalists in particular that this is a field that is alive with quackery and prohibitionist agendas and unserious scientists, very often dabbling in areas of science which are not even their area of real expertise, and hopefully bring a little bit more skepticism towards all this. I have to say just finally, there are now, fact-checking is now quite a big thing. Okay, you have the Reuters fact-check, the Channel 4 fact-check, Full Fact in the UK. Media organizations are increasingly interested in fact-checking stuff, which incidentally should be a fundamental part of being a journalist. It shouldn't really be something that you need to outsource to a separate organization. Journalists should really try and fact-check things themselves. But there is now more interest, actually, in fact-checking claims than perhaps ever before. And you do have organizations that are basically pretty neutral and would ruin their own credibility if they weren't neutral, looking at some of these things. And again, that helps. There is an element where you can name and shame. I'm not going to name anybody else in particular because there's so many of these people, but pretty much any e-cigarette researcher in the Bay Area of San Francisco would probably fall under that umbrella. And, it's not pointless, is what I'm saying. You can achieve something. It's difficult to measure it, but we must, the alternative is to do nothing, okay? And that's not an option.
Thanks, Chris. So we've gone from bad science to bad media that amplifies it, and I just wondered if you could just take us a step further by briefly referring to an example of the policy impacts of it when governments are pressured, because we've actually got a perfect example in the UK over the last year, haven't we?
With the disposable vape ban. Yeah, which wasn't actually based on any particular study at all, I don't think. And in fact, a study came out a week before the disposable ban was formally announced last week by public health people funded by cancer research. You know, this was not some libertarian article saying we've got deep concerns about what 2.6 million adults who are currently using disposable vapes are going to do if you ban disposable vapes. Make up 87% of the market. It doesn't seem an easy thing to nip in the bud. So, again, I think tracking the impact of individual studies or even a collection of studies in terms of policy making is actually quite difficult. But what it clearly does is it creates this climate of opinion based on what politicians think the science is saying. The reality is there is a huge amount of science around e-cigarettes, way more than most people realize. And yet people will still say, oh, we don't know about the effects of this. We know so much more about e-cigarettes. We arguably know more about e-cigarettes than we do about cigarettes, actually. So we have a huge amount of toxicological data, epidemiological data, blah, 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 blah. And we also know, in terms of policy making, from the economic evidence, what happens when you clamp down on e-cigarettes. You increase cigarette sales. There's a growing body of research, mainly from America, looking at the effect of advertising bans, of taxation, of flavor bans in particular. This clearly is not getting any cut through. Otherwise, governments wouldn't be looking at banning flavors, unless, of course, their secret agenda is to keep making a lot of money from tobacco duty, which I wouldn't discount as a possibility.
Thank you. Martin, taking this up to an international level now, obviously, it's not just scientists and media, but it's sort of huge, massively influential entities like the World Health Organization, which is the reason that we're all here at this time. Sticking with the how for now, we'll turn to the why in a moment. Would you just care to give us an outline of how the World Health Organization has, I know you could probably write a book about this, but has spread the kind of myths and alarmism that we've been talking about across this field?
Well, I've mentioned it a couple of times. The best example is their reports that they're providing to the parties to the convention, people who are coming over here. And they all read these reports before they come over to Panama, and they get a view from the WHO of what the science is. But as I said, this main document, I think it was Tub-Reg 9, said there is no evidence that e-cigarettes can help people quit smoking. And they do that by completely excluding the Cochrane Living Review, which finds this high certainty evidence that e-cigarettes can not only help people quit smoking, but they're about 6 times more effective than NRT. And in the last session, we spoke about this and said, well, Maria from Canada was saying, well, they must know about the science because, they know it's there. It's not they haven't seen this; they've just chosen to exclude it. And they also haven't included the OHID's 2022 comprehensive review, the 8th one in a series, and the final one, 1,468 pages, that investigated the impacts of vaping in England, is the report. Every aspect possible of vaping on cardiovascular disease, lung disease, everything. They went through all of it with a fine-tooth comb, and they excluded that entire survey because it obviously didn't fit with their agenda. And that came out at the end of it, and the thing was that we still think the 95% figure is broadly accurate, but we're not going to use that. What we will say is that vaping poses a fraction of the risks of smoking. And they said, oh, there's no long-term data, we can't make any conclusions. Well, you can only say that if you exclude OHID's 1,468-page report, plus the 7 reviews that went before that. So it's not exactly faking science, but it's just excluding things that don't fit with your agenda. And that's what the COP does, which shows that the FCTC Convention Secretariat isn't interested in the evidence. WHO isn't interested in presenting proper evidence to the parties. They're not an arbiter of an honest broker of information. They have an agenda, they have a narrative, and they're going to present something that fits in with that narrative rather than actually look at the science in the round and present something that's honest to the parties. I mean, the parties should be furious about this. I mean, hopefully, many of the parties will have done their own research and found that they're being lied to, and should be angry about it and should be questioning the WHO of why they're producing such shoddy science like that.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, no evidence that vapes help people quit cigarettes. It's worth noting, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe everyone on this panel used to smoke and now vapes instead.
Yeah. And there's 82 million. I mean, I think that figure's 2 years old. last time that there was a big survey, Global State of Tobacco Harm Reduction, came out with, globally there are 82 million users of vaping products. Are they saying that none of those have quit smoking using the vaping product? I mean, you know, if the public is presented with that, you know, everyone in the UK especially, because, you know, or particularly because we have such a high uptake of these products, everyone will know someone in their family who's using a vape to quit smoking. So when the WHO says, oh, there's no evidence whatsoever that people have quit smoking with these things, well, that's absurd. It's patently untrue. You can just look around high streets in London. I mean, I go up in London quite a lot. I live in South London. And you go up Oxford Street, and in the past, you'd see loads of people smoking. You barely see people smoking these days. I live near Morden Station, and I regularly look around there. And Morden isn't the most salubrious of neighbourhoods. But even there, vapers outnumber smokers, whereas 10, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. And I often mention going to sports events. You know, I'm a big fan of cricket and rugby, and I go to Twickenham and the Oval. And 20 years ago, I see people in their 20s smoking. Now, you barely see anyone in their 20s smoking. They're all using disposable vapes. Now, okay, you know, they say, oh, young people shouldn't use these products. But what would they be doing if disposable vapes weren't around? They'd probably be initiating nicotine use using cigarettes. And that's the thing that's missing in all this debate as well, is that, yes, so they say, oh, but there's lots of people using vapes that have never smoked before. Well, that's the way it's going to go if you replace something harmful with something less harmful. This should be a positive. They should be celebrating this instead of, yeah, go on, Chris.
I was just going to say, if you compare that claim from the WHO that there's no evidence, not even no good evidence, but actually no evidence at all, that vaping causes people to quit smoking, compare that to the way they describe policies such as alcohol advertising bans. Right? There's a Cochrane review on alcohol advertising bans which finds there's no good evidence to show that they reduce drinking or reduce alcohol-related harm. The WHO, that's one of their best buys, to ban alcohol advertising. The WHO strongly supports sugar taxes. There's no evidence at all around the world that sugar taxes have any effect on obesity. They will say, a slightly different example, but quite a pertinent one, I think. They'll say the COVID-19 vaccines are safe. Well, I think broadly speaking, you can make that claim, but clearly there are adverse effects from COVID vaccines, and in fact, COVID vaccines have almost certainly killed more people than vaping. When we say COVID vaccines are safe, we mean they are relatively safe, certainly safer than the risk of getting COVID, and they're safe enough. But when it comes to e-cigarettes, they don't say it's safe, they say the opposite. They say e-cigarettes are dangerous. So there's clearly a double standard in how they're interpreting evidence here.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And Tim, sorry it's taken a minute to get to you, but I do have a suitably meaty question that you can take your time over. So we've talked quite a bit about the how of all these problems. Can you give us your thoughts now about the why?
Sure, and just to reiterate what was said earlier on the how, it's just how prevalent these problems are. I mean, if you want to, I mean, some of the junk science we all know about, like the famous one where Professor Glantz tried to prove that time travel exists because people were getting heart attacks from vaping before they started vaping. But it isn't just those really, really big studies. There's a study that comes out every week that is essentially junk when you look at it, and yet it gets media. And this has consequences. You see something like yesterday, FDA Commissioner Cardiff in the United States, you know, the FDA Commissioner essentially said that vaping had the same harms as smoking. This is a lie. Like, this is a blatant lie. He knows it because his own agency knows that that's not true. And yet he repeats it, this gets popularized, and these have consequences. Because now more people in the United States, most people in the United States, not just most, and most doctors in the United States, think that vaping is more harmful than smoking. I was at a state Senate testimony hearing for a bill to ban vaping or something last year, where a mother was saying how she gave her high school daughter cigarettes to try and break her vaping addiction. So why is this? And I would say, first of all, if you want to look at look at this, if somebody is drowning, right? Somebody's drowning and they're clutching onto a life, like one of those life buoys, and somebody takes that life buoy away from them, then that person is morally, if not legally, responsible for murder. How is this different to what public health is doing at the moment? How is what people who are trying to ban life-saving products doing any different to this? How is this not murder, morally, if not legally? And so why are they doing this? one argument could well be they're so addicted to tax revenue, and that's why governments are doing that. And I think in some cases that's true. I think particularly when you've got state-owned tobacco companies, such as in India, there's an even stronger argument for this. I think that the way they justify promoting murder to themselves is the fact that they've made the calculation that they don't care if hundreds of millions of smokers die, because ending nicotine use in the long run is worth it. So they don't care that billions of people will die. They think that they are justified because nicotine is so bad it is worth billions of deaths. But I also think part of it is a psychological reason, where we have seen every single thing they have tried to propose fail. They went all in on plain packaging, which completely and utterly failed. It failed in Australia, it failed in France, it failed everywhere that it's been tried. And this was going to be the thing that would stop smoking. High taxes haven't stopped smoking, and Australia has the highest tax rates in the world. A low-income earner who smokes now spends more than half of their income on cigarettes. If you're unemployed and on welfare in Australia, it's 3/4 of your income on cigarettes if you're buying them legally when you've got $40 for a packet. So that hasn't worked. All of these command and control style methods that the tobacco lobby has, the public health lobby has tried, has failed. And they can't stand that the market has come up with a product that works, because it goes against every core of their ideology, but that you need big government bans, big government solutions to everything, and they just can't accept psychologically the fact that the market has solved a problem for them. And so I think that when you see the level of misinformation, it's probably a combination of those three things. It is subconsciously, it's the fact that they can't abide the fact that their solutions failed. And it is difficult for people to admit psychologically, everything I've dedicated my life to has failed. Someone else has done it and it's worked. This is difficult psychologically. I can sort of see where they're coming from, why they're bitter. But when you have billions of lives that are going to be lost because you've got a psychological problem, then you should bloody well get over it. And when you're looking at the tax revenue, how bloody immoral is it that a government is happy for people to die because that they won't get more additional revenue? How immoral is it then also for people to make this calculation that they don't like nicotine so much that they're happy for 1 billion people to die? That's a pretty evil calculation to make, when we know that nicotine itself isn't that harmful. I mean, the actual effects of nicotine are very, very well known. It's a mild stimulant, but it's probably no worse for you than the caffeine that's in this cup of coffee that I've got. I mean, that's very well established, that nicotine is not a carcinogen. It slightly elevates your blood pressure for the first little while while you use it, but in the same way that a cup of coffee does. This is not in dispute in the scientific community. So the fact that you have all of these, the why, I think those are probably the reasons, and it's profoundly sad.
Thank you, Tim. A very, very powerful summary there. Roberto, if I could come back to you and stick with the why, and perhaps from your perspective as a tobacco harm reduction advocate in Mexico, just to give us a kind of a case study of a country, could you describe the kind of opposition you faced and the influences that shape that opposition in your country?
Well, in Mexico, it's not so different from many other countries. Because the way tobacco control, and we know that tobacco control now, it's not the same in science. For example, Bloomberg Philanthropies is not funding science. The science with the methodological defects is mostly financed by the National Institute of Health, federal government of the US, by the FDA CTP, Center for Tobacco Products of the FDA, and other public American institutions, including the EPA. And in the European Union, there are plenty of public health institutions that also finance this creepy science, right? But when you go into activism, because it's politics, science is a fig leaf, right? But so when you go into activism, in political activism, then it is where these private special interest groups operate. And they study the country, and according to the country, the political system, the balance of forces, the level of activity of the social society, etc., that's the way they operate, right? And in Mexico, they happen to find a very centralizing, powerful president whose health minister is associated with all these private societies or NGOs, etc. And so it is a top priority, right? A top prohibition. But on the other hand, and it is like it has been said about India, you can get all the devices in the street because of the black market, right? And so going back, so this explains that in Mexico it's not very different from Argentina or from African countries. And what we see now is that even in Europe, there is a wave that it is also spreading in Europe. And I would like to talk about the latest, well, we are seeing that children, kids, young people are now the obsession, right? When you hear these mothers parents against vaping, you see how they scream and scream and they're protecting their children. These are very rich women from the New York area and the Bay Area. Our kids, the industry is stealing our kids, etc. And when you try, and I know people who have tried to reason with them, say, well, yes, it is right that you protect your kids, but what about you are in New York, you have huge fortunes, you are very affluent. What about some guy in Missouri or in Oklahoma who is 60 years old or 40 years old? No. He doesn't need banana flavor to quit smoking. No flavors. So what is behind this obsession of youth? I see it also in England. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that the British establishment is falling for this blackmail. And I'm old enough to remember the 1970s, a campaign against marijuana. Because I was in high school and we were trying marijuana, and I remember, and it was the same thing. The children, young people, gateway. And we can go back to the reefer madness, and also we realize, like, for example, Stalinism, Nazism, and more modern variants of them politically, like I know my wife is Cuban, and the way all these dictatorial regimes are children, young people. So we see now this, right? So why is the obsession for young people? I believe that there is a saying that says nationalism is the last resort of the scoundrel. What I would say is that the kids are the last resource of a technocracy that is being challenged by a disruptive technology. They really don't know what else to do. Everything they have done has not had much impact. Yes, they believe it's dangerous, etc., but the market keeps growing and growing. I'm sure that in the UK, people will still be using the disposables. So they hold on to the issue of young people, in a sense showing that they are painting themselves in a corner. And the more they feel that they are painting themselves in the corner, the more obtuse they become, and children is their last resource. And this is what we can feel. And just to finish, um, it is the problem we see is a technocracy that had his good days in the 1990s. 1990s, they play a positive favor. They battle the tobacco industry and so on, and they keep this narrative. This narrative and this activity gave them a lot of reputation, a lot of input in world affairs, and they feel they're losing it. And I think this is the reason why we see this strengthening of their knee-jerk opposition. It is fear. What we see them as Goliaths, huge, but we have to see also that inside of them there is deep insecurity, and there is a sense of being painted in the corner, and this is what explains why they are acting in this way.
Thanks, Roberto. Some great points there, and so much of what we're seeing is certainly straight out of the drug war playbook to those of us who've followed that wider field. Turning now for the last part of our discussion to kind of more solutions-oriented points when the problems are so multi-layered. But coming back to media, Chris, is part of the problem at least that bad news sells better when we've got these extraordinary real-world success stories, the vape uptake in the UK that Martin referenced, snus in Scandinavia, heated tobacco products in Japan and South Korea. Is there anything you can suggest that when most people are unaware of those stories and the implications of them? Anything we can do to kind of improve the communication about those things?
I think it's quite difficult because you're absolutely right, the bad news sells. You're not going to get any newspaper coverage really even the Cochrane reviews don't get any newspaper coverage, right? I mean, it would only be a small paragraph or two saying Cochrane review says it's high quality. Even that doesn't get covered. What does get covered is, some zebrafish being coated in formaldehyde and the implications of that for vapors. And it is pretty much an intractable problem. On top of that, you've also got the unwillingness of journalists to move beyond the 1990s narrative on the tobacco industry. And even though the tobacco industry only makes a proportion of the e-cigarettes in the world and was quite late to the party in manufacturing them, anything that's vaguely associated with tobacco can only fit into one narrative, which is that we are being fooled, and in the long run, it'll turn out we're being fooled. And no journalist wants to be made a monkey of and feel that they've been caught up in some plot to mislead the public. So that, again, is going to be extremely difficult to shift. It will probably never shift, realistically. Any story along these lines will be reported as the tobacco industry is trying to do something behind the scenes to addict kids or what have you. And if they can't find any evidence whatsoever, even the most circumstantial evidence to support that, they just won't cover the story at all. So what do you do? Well, I think it's very hard. The best we can hope for very often is that journalists simply don't cover these stupid studies. The best thing would be if they start getting interested in what I think is an interesting story, which is how we got so many junk scientists producing junk science. Mm-hmm. And why are they doing it? And I personally think that's a really interesting story. And looking at the various statistical tricks that are used, I think is interesting. But according to other journalists, it's actually quite boring, and they're not interested really in covering it. And also, it's a bit too complicated. It is possible in the very long run that an alternative narrative will start to become the conventional wisdom, which is that a lot of people in public health are actually fanatics and they're not that interested in public health, and they'll say anything and do anything they can to reach a preordained conclusion. But I think it's asking and hoping a lot that that's going to be happening anytime soon. So I would just go back to what I said originally about when the media is reporting any form of science in a bad way, or if they're giving undue coverage to junk from San Francisco, just try, you know, in whatever way you can, whether it's tweeting the journalists, emailing the paper, talking to other journalists. I know a lot of journalists do follow me on Twitter, so they maybe pay attention when I write something saying this study is wrong and for these reasons, and just hope that, you know, some of the more self-respecting news outlets and journalists will decide that they're at the very least going to give short shrift to the junk studies and maybe focus on something else, and even, who knows, now and again even maybe produce some sort of good news story. Because there are good news stories there. I mean, genuine stories. Every year, for example, the UK will publish the figures of how many vapors there are, how many smokers there are. Smoking is almost always at an all-time low. That is not front page news, but you think it might be room to put it somewhere in the paper.
You would. Thanks, Chris. And Tim, you wanted to jump in there with your thoughts about...
One piece of optimism from that, though, is we're seeing a lot of other fields over the last maybe 5-10 years, journalists starting to get interested in the problems of science. We've seen the replicability crisis, which has got a lot of mainstream media attention, where a lot of studies that things have been based on can't be replicated, particularly in the field of psychology. You've seen the case where there was significant media where one of the US's top fraud researchers, funnily and ironically enough, was found to have fabricated her studies. Like, literally, like, I think it was one of the Ivy Leagues, considered the top of the field, and she made it up. Like, she literally, it found out and made up the numbers in the Excel spreadsheet, and she was caught. There's been other mainstream media coverage of the fact that there were some cancer researchers who, in their papers, basically used Photoshop for to do their results. So this is starting to get mainstream media attention. You see long-form pieces in the New Yorker about this. Yes. New York Times is covering this. Now, so I think that there is some media attention happening. The problem is nobody has linked to the fact that there is so many problems rife throughout the scientific community. And I think what Chris said was really interesting as to why this is the case, and like the incentive problems, the publish or perish problems, government funding problems, all of those are really interesting things. And I think there might be some, I could be over-optimistic, but after my very pessimistic earlier remarks, if we can draw the links to, you see all this junk science you're seeing in all of these other fields, maybe look at junk science here, where we have such a history of junk science, and not just the glancement, it comes out everywhere. There was one study in Canada, and I can't remember the exact reason, but it went national news everywhere. 6 months later, somebody looked at the data, and this was actually, I think, a genuine mistake. They left out a minus in one of their tables, and when you put the minus back in, it has the completely opposite result. It was a youth vaping study or something. I can't remember that was exactly that they left out a minus, but it was a mistake of that nature.
Hammond. It was Hammond's paper.
Hammond?
Hammond.
Okay. So if this is starting to get attention in other fields, you can make a sexy story out of it if that's all journalists care about. So maybe package all of these together into some sexy story about scientific corruption, which leads to people dying as a result. And you might be able to get some interesting journalists out of it. Maybe, if you just package it up as part of this broader thing.
I've tried it. Because I live in an environment of scientists of different types, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, in a very big university. It's very difficult. Very difficult. I know people who are aware of what you're saying, the lack of replication in psychology, and also even in climate change. People are aware that there are things happening in climate change. But when I bring my case, all of them believe the narrative of the 1990s. It is very difficult. Believe me, it's very difficult with my own colleagues, PhDs in physics, talented people, liberal, kind, etc. I bring the case, say, why are you interested in this? Say, well, because I'm a user. You defend your vice. Yeah, okay, let's say I defend my vice, but it's legitimate, isn't it? Well, tobacco industry, blah, blah, blah. What happens here, it's a question of markings, right? I am a scientist, and my colleagues, we direct PhDs, we publish and perish, we have sabbaticals, we are in academic institutions, and look around there, the tobacco control people, they are also scientists, officially. I'm not saying, okay, and they direct PhDs, they publish, they have sabbaticals, they are in universities, and it is asking one church to criticize another one, right? I say, in that church, you will find lots of pedophiles. As I'm telling this to a priest of my church, it's difficult. It's difficult to make them believe that colleagues or people who have their same markings are doing things that they wouldn't dare do in their
Yes.
academic life. It relieves me. I think you are right. We should persevere in this direction, but it's not going to be easy. This narrative of the tobacco war is still very prevalent.
Yes.
I-
I'll let you jump in quickly, Tim. We are quite low on time.
Very, very quickly, though. The other thing, and I think Chris touched on this, is if you have a scientist who says, there's a big problem, give me lots of money to research it, they're more likely to get money than, there's no problem. Why would you research it? So when scientists go and say, I'm going to show why vaping is a really, really big problem, there's a bias in the system that they're going to get money. So there is a core issue here. You see this in climate, you see this in other things, as to how grants are structured. And if you need to attack the entire grant distribution method through the NIH and all these things to try and address this problem, because if you have this public choice problem, unless we address it at the root, I think we're also going to be at a disadvantage.
Thanks, Tim. And Martin, I'll give the last word to you. We talked at the previous panel about how so much media is hopeless, and the more powerful mode of communication often comes from consumers, because when people see real life stories of lives being transformed, it often resonates more with them than reading statistics and studies. And so we've talked about different areas for improvement, to say the least. But part of this, of course, has to be the consumer movement. And I just wondered if you could close by telling us what impact consumers can have and what consumers need to be as effective as they possibly can as advocates.
Well, I've always said consumers are the strongest voice because we vote, and we have experience. And I always give the example that, I ran a transport company up until I sold it in 2021. And I may have mentioned this earlier in the week, but I quit smoking around about 2015. At the time, we used to have a summer party every year because we did transport for schools, so you couldn't have something at Christmas. We'd have a summer party when the summer term packed up. And the first thing we had to look at when we chose a venue for our party is what facilities they got for smokers, because we had a majority of our drivers and our passenger assistants were smokers, because it's just basic work. You get semi-retired people, and it's not well paid, so you tend to be in that area of recruitment where you get in that sort of person who tend to smoke. But because I quit smoking using vapes, and they come in the office for all sorts of different reasons, they ask questions about it, and I tell them, and occasionally I'd have something I picked up at a conference, or not a conference, a vape show or something, and I'd pull it out of my desk to try that. And towards the end, before we sold it, I think there was only less than 10% of our staff use it. I'd go down to the schools where we picked up and see most of them just vaping, whereas before we used to have problems with the schools, and they're leaving cigarette butts all over the place. We never had that. But that wasn't anything rather than just talking to each other and word of mouth collecting up. So, yeah, and I've always said the more people start vaping and the more families see the benefit of the result, then the better it's going to be. And hopefully then, just by people observing on the street and observing what's going on around them, they'll start to realise that these articles are just, alarmist nonsense. But I just want to give you a last thing that would be quite funny, you might want to end it. When you're talking about there aren't any good news stories, well, I saw one, and this is absolutely true, I guarantee it. I can't remember which local newspaper it was, but in my Google alerts came up this article under vaping, and it was, I think, say it was Leicester or Nottingham, I don't know. It was saying, local Leicester woman, really proud that her son has quit vaping. And, and there they had her sitting there beaming with her son in front of her. Now, when was the last time you heard some, even in a local paper, say, mum's really proud that her son quit smoking? I mean, it just doesn't happen. So even something like that, it's like, that's how bad the media's got, that this whole sort of youth vaping thing is they're scrambling around trying to find anything about youth vaping. And someone actually considered that a story in the local newspaper.
I can't wait to read it. My thanks to Tim, Roberto, Martin, and Chris, and thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Yeah, I was having lots of trouble to get into my colleagues.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the next session. This one is on the exclusion of science and consumers at COP, which we all know a lot about. And joining me, we have Kurt Yeo from South Africa, Conor Malloy from New Zealand, Thomas O'Gorman from Mexico, and Filip Tokic from Croatia. Now, you know, consumers watching this, they'll all be aware that COP excludes consumers, it includes policy people, it includes scientists. It just carefully selects who it wants to turn up, and there are many of them, like I've mentioned a few times, 225 Bloomberg-funded personnel there just talking to parties and trying to get their views across, whereas we're stuck out here and we can't meet any of them. So considering this, I think it's logical to start with you, Thomas, because you applied,
Yes.
didn't you, to attend. And earlier this week, you went through the process of that. Can you tell me what... you weren't the only one, was there? There was a number of you who did it, and you all had the same rejection letter.
In COP 8, we were present. Yes.
Yeah.
In 2018, in that time, we were allowed to get into the venue, as you were even able to apply on the same day. But after the first speech and some kind of resolution, they took the public and the press out. So we stayed like maybe an hour. I don't remember how long.
Yeah, it was a decision made at COP8 that you
Yes.
would have to pre-apply. Whereas
Yes.
before that, you know, I've been to COP8 and I've been to COP7, and you could get into public gallery. But do you want to just for viewers, just explain why it's so important that consumers get to go into this event? I mean, why did you apply in the first place?
Well, I mean, I've been advocating for tobacco harm reduction for now several years. And why this is important? Because the COP is the mechanism of implementation of the FCTC, and domestic laws derive from the dispositions and set forth in the FCTC and the decisions that are made in the COP. And international order should be construed under democratic and principles of inclusion, and always protecting human rights. And one very important human right is the right to have a meaningful participation for all interested parties, for all the interested groups, especially consumers, because we are the persons that are being affected by the decisions that are taken into the COP. I applied to be a member of the public because that was the last chance to be present in the venue, the last chance to be visible for the delegates, maybe the last chance to get the chance to talk with someone. Why? Because consumers are not even granted the character of observers at the COP. If you have to fulfill or to follow the procedures set forth in the COP documents, only certain associations can be accepted as observers, and the only consumer association, the only consumer organization that filed for an observer status was INCO and was rejected again. And as an individual, I said, well, okay, then I will apply and I can at least be there, at least watch, and as I was telling, have this opportunity. But all the consumer applications to be accepted as public, because I was not the only one, were rejected. Someone told me about someone that wasn't even an advocate of harm reduction. He wasn't even a consumer, and he also got rejected. The thing is the reason of the rejection. And the reason of the rejection, I believe, it's the application of the Article 5.3 of the treaty under the view, under their interpretation, because Article 5.3 never said that human rights should be violated, and that people should not enjoy their right to have a meaningful participation, and that they should be discriminated. The thing is that if you see the COP8 decision in which they amended the rules to accept public, the only criteria besides the requisites, besides having to apply 60 days before, besides having to run your information or your letter of intent, the only criteria set in the Annex 4 of that resolution is to fulfill the 5.3 clause. So they are considering us part of the industry, or at least they are considering that consumers' interests are in some way aligned to the industry interests. But come on, I'm a vapor. I don't even use tobacco. my product is not under the FCTC field of application, and yet they take us out of, they don't accept us, they discriminate us, and well, what can I say? Actually, I filed a complaint, a complaint at the special procedures of the United Nations General Human Rights Council because this discrimination cannot be tolerated. International order should not be construed by violating human rights. And that's the most important thing. Human rights are being violated here.
Yeah, I mean, the misapplication of Article 5.3 is quite incredible in your case. I mean, you're just a consumer.
Yeah.
You know, and originally Article 5.3 is supposed only to be used by governments. It's governments must protect itself from influence of policies from the tobacco industry. In this case, there's no government, there's no tobacco industry, but they apply Article 5.3 anyway. And it's a hell of a smear because, as you say, I think the reason they do it is because they say, well, you're a vapor and you're advocating for vaping, so therefore you want vaping to carry on, and tobacco industry makes some vaping products, so therefore you're acting in the interest, what they say, further the interests of the tobacco industry, which is quite weird. And what always gets me about it is how paranoid it is. I mean, what's going to happen if you're in the gallery watching a load of people making their speeches? I mean, how are you going to influence? Throw cans at them or something? I mean, what's going to happen there?
Yes, it seems that our mere presence is considered a bad influence on delegates. So how can that happen? I mean, this is pure and absolute discrimination. If I am being discriminated because I use nicotine, it's because then I'm being discriminated because I am using or exercising my right to have a choice. If I am being discriminated because I quit smoking by vaping, which they don't like, but I did quit smoking, then I am being discriminated because I exercise my right to health. If they discriminate me because I am part of ProVapor Mexico, because if I am at the governing board of INCO, they are discriminating me because of exercising my right of association. I mean, I cannot understand any reason to discriminate consumers, anyone. The thing is that they have weaponized the Article 5.3. They have twisted it and they use it in accordance to their own interest, to impose their own views. So if you allow me, if something must be revisited and corrected in the FCTC, is the guidelines and the way to apply Article 5.3, because it is not in accordance to international law and it is not in accordance, at least in my country, to national law, because in theory, international law and national laws should always promote and respect human rights, and human rights are not, there's not a hierarchy of human rights. There can be some interferences, but laws must protect, as it is possible, all human rights, considering as they are indivisible and interrelated.
I remember when I was chair of the New Nicotine Alliance, which is a consumer association, no ties to industry whatsoever, we submitted a consultation response to a WHO consultation on non-communicable diseases. And we just wanted to make the point that while you're talking about how you reduce non-communicable diseases, which is you know, kind of things that have come from consumer products, you know, diseases that come, they call it like they're non-contagious diseases. They're diseases that happen, but they can't be passed like a virus. And we just made the point that maybe look at harm reduction. And I remember we had a reply from the WHO saying they weren't going to consider our response because they considered us part of the tobacco industry for the same reason, furthering the interests of the tobacco industry. And they put us in the same category as arms dealers, which I thought was a bit over the top. But this was just one consultation response among thousands. And when you say weaponize Article 5.3, it's almost like they were using that to make a point, like as an insult, as a dagger, to say, keep away from us, leave us alone, kind of thing. Connor, I'll talk to you because you're kind of a policy guy, you're a numbers guy, you're a think tank person, and think tanks tend to advise governments and provide data to governments and policies that they could take up. Now, the people that are allowed in COP are generally civil servants from the Department of Health from whichever country. People like you would be excluded because you're considered outside of that kind of like, cabal of people that they like to come in. But obviously, policy people could have a good impact on these and provide data and provide cost-benefit analysis and things like that. Why do you think you wouldn't be welcomed by an organisation like WHO for COP meetings?
I think there's a clear aversion to harm reduction within the WHO. They just don't want to hear about it. And I think that if they've got scientists or policy people who can understand, basic economics of supply and demand and, what happens when you create a black market in human behavior and all of those things, then when you've got those people there, then they are forced to hear the messages about harm reduction saves lives. They're forced to hear about vaping and snus and these other products actually reducing deaths and reducing sickness, and they're forced to confront the reality that the path that we're advocating is the correct path and the one that's going to lead to the most lives saved. And so they don't want to hear that, and so what they do is they shut us out, which is a big issue. And if I can just touch on some of the consumer stuff as well, is that you always want to hear from the people that are using the product or engaging in the kind of behaviour that you're wanting to regulate in whatever particular way, because you want to understand how they're going to react to whatever regulation you're putting in place. If people enjoy a product or they find a lot of use from a product, you ban it, they're still going to find a way to keep using it. And those kinds of things are really important for people to know and understand. And so I think it's really a big loss in terms of policy making, because you want to be able to understand what the unintended consequences are, and they have a lot of consequences that extend well beyond, just the consumers themselves. Wider society ends up paying, and taxpayers who don't smoke end up paying when you get policy settings wrong, because you've got increased costs of crime, badly thought out policy then has to be revisited in the future. You've got ongoing health costs and all of those things. And so I think, the cost of getting it wrong is too high to exclude interested parties and people that can provide some valuable insight in science. And I think that's really saddening.
I mean, how does it make you feel as a policy guy and someone who understands economics when you hear the WHO and tobacco control groups saying that if you ban a product, it won't lead to black markets because we can handle that. That's no problem at all. I mean, basically, if you've got high demand, and remember in the last session I spoke about 82 million vapors across the world. There are about 200 million, no, I think it's 120 million, using safer nicotine products like nicotine pouches, heated tobacco, that sort of kind of thing. And they're saying 120 million people using those products, but we can ban them and there won't be any effect at all. That's just an industry myth. I mean, how does that make you feel? I mean, it's an economic fact, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the history of prohibition around the world with all different products. Alcohol is a good example, but you even look in the real world today, you look in Australia, they've got an effective prohibition where you need a prescription to get access to these products, but only 2% of doctors are actually legally able to provide a prescription. And so you've got, the vast majority of people that use vaping products in Australia are purchasing them illegally. You've got shipments of these products coming through that are hard to monitor, but you also see it in the tobacco industry in Australia and New Zealand, where there's both very high taxes. And so I was reading a stat the other day with tobacco smuggling into Australia, where they hide them in shipping containers. They only need 1 out of every 30 to make it through in order to make a profit, because if you get those cartons through, you can sell them, undercut the legal price, and people are willing to pay it because they want those products anyway. And so the black market will always find a way around. And so you can't reduce demand by simply banning something. The way you reduce demand for, say, cigarettes is to provide people with a better choice. And that better choice is it's different for everyone, but it's these harm reduction products of vaping, of snus, nicotine pouches, and providing those choice to people means that A, they save money, B, there's less harm, they're healthier, And the last one is that there's less cost to society overall.
One last question for you. One of the things you hear from tobacco control, especially from WHO, is that because they're interested in health, that's their primary concern is health. They have in recent years said that they want governments to consider health as a first priority, not just in the Department of Health, but in every department. So that'd be the Treasury, the Environment Department, Department of Culture. I mean, every single department, its primary responsibility should be to think about health. So how can they square that with the fact that they only allow people to come along to this conference from one department, mostly? It's very rare that you'll get people from other departments. I mean, surely they should be invited. If they want every department to think about health, they should be inviting delegations from countries that include all of those disciplines, surely.
Yeah, and I agree, especially when, like, for example, I think it would be valuable to have people coming in from customs, for example, who in New Zealand just this week, we saw reports of record amounts of loose-leaf tobacco getting seized at the border. And I can tell you if some of it's getting seized, there's certainly other stuff coming through, because that's why, people wouldn't keep sending it if they were catching all of it. And so, having people from customs would be helpful. Having people from Treasury to look at, the tax impact or the health costs, because if you've got people still smoking, but they're purchasing those products on the black market, you still bear all the health costs, but you don't get any of the revenue to pay for it. So that's something worth considering. And looking at just the wider societal impacts, I think it's valuable to have people that can bring a perspective that, I know that it's quite upsetting for some people, but hearing a perspective you haven't heard before for some of these bureaucrats might be quite tough. But I think that it's valuable, and it leads to better policy making.
Let's consider they're not letting us in. They're not allowing us in. They're finding all sorts of excuses not to let you in. What's the other way you can get in? You can join a delegation, or you can be selected to be on a delegation. So I'll talk to you, Philip, because you mentioned that when you were flying over here, you have conversations with people on your delegation. You were on conversant terms with them. So what possibility do you think of getting any ideas through to your delegation when they come to COP? If we can't go ourselves, how easy is it, do you think, to talk to your delegation and get them to bring up points that consumers care about at COP?
Well, I would say I have one more story to share regarding the delegation. There were two of them, and one of them have using IQOS. So he not burn tobacco. And I said, why do you use that? He said, it's much safer than cigarettes. Excellent. So you know about harm reduction. And I asked the other delegate, did you know that no pro-vaping associations were accredited so that they participate? And she said, yes, of course, but every anti-vaping can go. Of course, you are a tobacco lobbyist. Really? And when did we become tobacco lobbyists? I said, we know each other from 2013. So when the first TPD in Europe came, when there was TPD, we saw it didn't go in the right way, so we made an association and we made the conference. And in 2013, we met for the first time, so we have a long-term relationship. And we attend the same conferences over the year, and she know us, she know our positions and everything about harm reduction, about the electronic cigarettes. And so, from when did you label us as tobacco lobbyists? It's a new thing to put a label on the association. You're all tobacco lobbyists. We weren't tobacco lobbyists back then because in 2013 and 14 you didn't have products from tobacco industry. The first product, at least in the European Union, as I know, was IQOS in 2016, maybe a year earlier in Italy and Switzerland, but in 2016, the tobacco industry get their first product on the market. And we are from 2013. So how come we became suddenly tobacco lobbyists? So I think that's their new agenda. That if you don't agree with them, if you think there are possibility, and we know there is huge possibility to quit smoking, you're labeled as tobacco lobbyist. We did a research last year. It was a research for our conference, and we want to know more about the vapors, their habit and everything. You know, we know everybody is vaping, but you know there are dual users. There are users that are vaping and smoking, or vaping and using some other things. So we wanted for the conference to know a little bit more. And we found out that 99% of the people that were ex-smokers, so 75% of them don't smoke at all. So 75%. And I told her that. She said nothing. You know, if you're public health officials and someone gave you some information, so okay, send me your research. I will see the methodology. I will see something. But she said nothing. 75% of the people that we interviewed don't smoke anymore. So, you know, I think it's their general agenda. Just label everybody as, you know, as a tobacco lobbyist, and it's easy.
So why do you think they've got that attitude? I mean, obviously you've had conversations with them from 2013, and I think Croatia were quite new to the EU in 2013, weren't they? So you got on fine then, and now they've labelled you this. Have they done that because they've been told to by the WHO, or have they done it because maybe they felt you were a pest or something, you were annoying them? I don't know. Why do you think they've done that? And surely if they're talking to someone like you who has knowledge on this subject, why are they not doing what they should be doing and giving that information at these meetings like this, and saying, well, what we found in our country is this, transferring that information to the COP meeting itself?
Well, it's interesting, you know. When we tell to them, look at the Sweden, you know, it's an example, it's a world example. Look at the Sweden. We don't want to talk about Sweden. Why? Why don't you want to talk about the best example in the world we have? We don't want to talk about Sweden. Sweden is a case for itself, like, you know. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. For me personally, since I'm now 11 years with the relations with the public health, I have a feeling that somebody is lobbying them, and that lobbying is much more. Help me find the word. Powerful than it was before. Before we had, I don't know, probably you all remember that in the first days of the vaping devices exploded every day. And then it stopped. At some point it stopped. So nothing explodes. But what happened after? Now after we have a valley that it's not a real, you know, real threat. It's not about the vaping and everything. But yeah, they're definitely lobbied, and then they changed their mind.
It does. It's reminiscent of what happened in the UK, I have to say, because around the same time, you know, I was there in Brussels fighting the TPD back in 2012, 2013, and we, as consumers, had a bit of a dialogue with people in Department of Health. We had MEPs that would talk to us and all that. And we had, in the UK Parliament, people from the NNA were invited to give evidence at the Science and Technology Committee and give evidence at parliamentary events. And over time, that seems to have dissipated, and now it's almost non-existent. There was a Health and Social Care Committee meeting in spring last year, and there was no consumer invited to give evidence at all. And it was talking about youth vaping and disposable vapes mostly. So yeah, we've kind of got the same experience. Now, Kurt, South Africa, do you have any, again, you're not going to be allowed into COP. Do you have any dealings with your delegation or people? You know, do they listen to you? I mean, surely a delegation, if they're going to represent this country's interests, they should be talking to people like you and getting the consumer perspective. I mean, they won't accept consumers in COP. Surely the national delegation of South Africa should be listening to your input before they go to COP.
I'm just going to answer this with the example. Our current Tobacco Products and Electronic Delivery Systems Control Bill, which was presented to the public in 2018. Since 2018, right up until today, stakeholders in the electronic delivery systems space were afforded only 2 hours, actually 4 hours. Originally it was 2 hours, but they had to extend it to the following week because that consultation fell on Eid, and unfortunately a lot of our friends in the Islamic belief could not attend it, so they were forced to extend another 2 hours the following week. So that's effectively 4 hours since 2018. So to answer that, no, we don't really have. So they do provide us certain areas. For example, what's happening this weekend, starting tomorrow, is public participation processes. And to give you an example, it's in the Western Cape, which is the province of Cape Town, and the communication in order to invite the public to participate in those hearings came out this morning. So, and the other interesting thing about that is that none of those hearings will be hosted in Cape Town. So they don't want to hear from people effectively. So why would they want to hear from me? And that's rather unfortunate. It is rather unfortunate because I think if they embrace harm reduction for tobacco in the same way as they've embraced harm reduction for HIV and AIDS, we would be in a far better place.
So I'll go back to you, Connor. What does this say for democracy, basically? If the WHO is not allowing people to even watch what is happening, just not let alone actually get involved in discussion, but not even allowed to watch proceedings, and you can't really make any impact directly with the delegations for these individual countries that are going to COP. What does that say about the democratic process? I mean, how are people supposed to get their voices heard anywhere in this entire process?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key parts of democracy is transparency, because you can't kick out bad decision makers if you don't know who the bad decision makers are. You can't lobby for different processes or encourage the government to change direction if you don't know what direction they're heading in, or how decisions are being made, or the process in which these decisions, they're coming to these decisions. And so I think that is a big issue around transparency, and that is a big problem with a big democratic problem. I mean, with some laws in New Zealand, if they're particularly controversial or going to impact a wide range of people, they'll actually have a touring select committee that goes around to all different towns in the country, around the whole country, to hear from people and let people that otherwise wouldn't be able to travel or go to rural areas where there's no internet connection, to allow them to submit and have their voice heard on these bills. But then in other areas, they don't want to have a bar of it. We've seen in New Zealand, there was some regulations that were made quite hastily, changing some of the nicotine content allowed in vapes. And so the retailers adapted to that, and then the health regulator came along and said to one retailer that, no, sorry, you've misinterpreted the regulations. You have to stop, otherwise we're going to shut you down. And that regulator said, no, we're pretty sure we've interpreted it right. We've had our lawyers look at it and everything. Can we please meet with you to explain why we're operating the way we are? And they said, no, the FCTC prevents us from doing that. And they said, well, firstly, we're not in the tobacco industry. We've never been in the tobacco industry, so that doesn't apply to us. Secondly, you met with us a couple of years ago, so clearly that's not what's stopping you. And they ended up having to go to court to figure this out, spend hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars the government spent before conceding that they had misinterpreted their own regulations. And so when you don't allow people to engage and be part of a transparent process, it's a lot harder to pick up mistakes earlier on, or flaws in reasoning, or pick up on consequences that may be unintended. Someone else in the industry might see it, or someone who's a policy expert might see those kinds of things, but the bureaucrats may not. And so that's the other reason why it's important to have that transparency, and then that leads on to accountability.
Yeah, I remember that. That's where they misunderstood the difference between free-base nicotine and nicotine salts, wasn't it? That's what it
Yeah.
came down to. Yeah, and I think they still got it wrong, to be honest. Looking at it, they got it the wrong way round. But yeah, that's a great point you make. That, you know, I mean, this is what we've got now, isn't it, with COP10, where they're not listening to people. They're quite clearly going down the wrong policy route, but don't want to hear any sort of challenge to their authority. Do you want to talk about Mexico? Same question, really. What chance have you got of talking to your delegation and influencing them to go and do the right thing at COP?
No, the Mexican government, as you can conclude from having our president proposing to ban vaping in the Constitution, is almost inaccessible. And the thing is that all this tendency at international level, at national level, of exclusion of any person that they consider some kind of enemy or some kind of opinion that does not agree with their own, it's a betrayal of the core principle of informed opinion and of public participation in the creation of health policies. I mean, health cannot be achieved without us, because we are talking about our health. In theory, the goal of the FCTC is to reduce or to end the diseases and the deaths related to smoking. Come on, that's what we want. That's what we fight for. And that's why we say, hey, here are the alternatives. Here is tobacco harm reduction. This will help. So if their goal and our goal is the same and we are being excluded, the only logical reason is that their goal shifted and that they have become some kind of tyranny of abstinence. I'm sorry to say that, but their methods are not appropriate. They are violating human rights. In Mexico, it's kind of difficult to have access to authorities. Every time there's going to be a forum, or Roberto Sussman gets excluded, Juan Jose Sirion gets excluded. The last one I wasn't, fortunately, and in part is because just in a chat with the assistant of the senator that was organizing this forum, I said, well, let me know, because she called me to tell me that the health ministry was questioning my presence there. And I said, well, let me know at least, because I have to ask permission at my job to go to the forum. And then the senator asked the assistant that if she was sure that I was not part of the tobacco industry. And she said, I don't think so. He has to ask permission at his job to attend the forum. And that was the only reason that at the end allowed me to participate in this forum. So Article 5.3 has been, as I said later, it has become a dagger not to slit throats, but to cut voices.
Okay, let's go even further backwards in this process. I'll give an example from the UK. The NNA in March last year organised a call to action, and they asked for consumers to write to their MPs and tell their stories and say, when the government goes to COP, please stand up for our interests, please stand up for harm reduction. And we know that there were a lot of letters generated from this, because the Shadow Health Secretary, in a debate in Westminster just about a month or two ago, maybe just over a month ago, said, all of us in this hall will have had letters from our constituents, and we know, consumers, you have been heard. So they all got these letters. MPs all over the country got them. But then what happens at COP? The UK delegation went along and said nothing about harm reduction. And one thing that is a constant in all the parliamentary question answers, and one was published today, funny enough, exactly on the subject, always mentioned the Swap to Stop campaign. And this parliamentary question answer again mentioned the Swap to Stop campaign. And yet they came to Panama and they didn't mention the Swap to Stop campaign. So they've all had letters, they've all had pleas from just ordinary members of the public. And it looks like the UK has completely ignored them. So, Philip, I mean, did you do any preparation for COP? Did you get some of your Croatian consumers to write to their elected representatives and see if you could influence on the COP? I mean, we're going right back. You're not even talking about speaking directly to the delegations now. You're saying talking to elected representatives and pass on their views. Did you do any campaigns like that and get any success?
No. We didn't do anything like that, because democracy, Croatia is a young democracy, so we still don't function as a real democracy. We are, we have a high level of corruption, so we understand when we see corruption, and this is what we see today with the World Health Organization. It's a kidnapped institution. It's corrupt and kidnapped institution, and I think that our job is to bring it back. Firstly, to bring it back. So there should be the way, because this is the precedent, that they exclude consumers. Unbelievably, they decided to exclude consumers. You can't do that. In democracy, you can't exclude, because you don't like it what they say. You don't like the way they quit smoking. In this case, what's in the other cases? It's not just the smoking that the World Health Organization is covering. So I think in the future, it will tend to the process that they will need to change the financing or whatsoever, and that become the institution that we expect to be. When you say World Health Organization, that you think they want everything good and that their measures and guidelines will be for the health of the people, and not as we have it today.
So it seems like in your country, you can't go to COP, your delegation isn't listening to you, and there's no real democracy, so people can get their views heard. I mean, you're kind of stuffed in Croatia, aren't you, really? Let's face it. Yeah, maybe, yeah. I'll just quickly with you, Connor. New Zealand did mention harm reduction in their statement, and you've had a change of government. So was there a consumer campaign in New Zealand to get things noticed at COP, or was that just done by the new government, who seemed far more enlightened than the one that went before on this kind of subject?
I think both governments, to differing degrees, were at least somewhat supportive of harm reduction products. Mainly vaping was the only one that we really have legal. But in New Zealand, we had a campaign where we asked people to write to New Zealand's health officials, urging them to oppose any kind of Australian-style vape ban or anything like that. And we simply highlighted, look at New Zealand and Australia and our smoking our policies around vaping and what's happened to our smoking rates, and the answer's right in front of you around what works. So that's one kind of area where we went. We have no way of knowing whether or not that's what led them to push for harm reduction. But also the new government is a lot more in favour of harm reduction. So in the coalition agreement, it's looking, one of the things that they want to do is explore legalising more of the smokeless, non-combustible nicotine products and things like that, which I think would be really positive. And so that's the kind of direction we're seeing them being that they're heading.
Kurt, I dread to ask this question about South Africa. You've said you've tried talking to a delegation, or you've tried talking to the government. What about just general consumers? You've got Vaping Save My Life, your organisation. Have you had consumers who maybe subscribe to your organisation try to write to elected officials and try and get their voices across? And has it had any success?
Martin, I don't believe so. Probably because, much the same as Croatia, we're kind of a new democracy. There's a lot of corruption over there, and frankly, people that smoke are treated as sinners or lepers. But during listening to all of this at the moment, I'm actually quite surprised how we even got to a point where this now becomes a democratic discussion. It really. I'm trying to think is there any other intervention, health intervention, that needed to go to a democratic process? We didn't have, I don't believe we had these discussions around nicotine replacement therapies or providing sugar-free or fat-free products. I didn't think we would have any of those things. I mean, the reality is that we have the most deadliest consumable product ever created that kills anywhere between half of the long-term users or 2 out of 3 of its long-term users. 1.3 billion people use this product, 8 million deaths per annum, and now suddenly we have a product that was invented in 2003 by a Chinese pharmacist that was just literally lapped up by desperate smokers out there. Innovation just started blooming and exploding for at least a decade by consumers getting involved, trying to, make these products better, introduced a whole host of things, innovation. Big tobacco woke up and thought, hang on, we are facing our Kodak moment. This could very well destroy the tobacco industry. And obviously, they started making moves. But in essence, we have a product that is significantly less harmful. And what really concerns me, or what really perplexes me, not concerns you, perplexes me, we're now talking about democratic processes around public health issues. When we have the science, we have anecdotal evidence from users, we have population studies in terms of how effective these products are. We have the Cochrane review. I mean, that's the gold standard. We have all of these things, and we're still talking about a democratic process. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know if it makes sense to any of you guys out there or anybody out here, but we're now talking about wanting to be heard about a product that is significantly less harmful and has the potential to save millions of lives. How's that a democratic process?
Well, in what I'm saying is just how to get ourselves heard. This is a thing. So we
But Martin, why would we need to be heard? It's all the science is there. Why do we have to fight to be heard? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, this is part of the title of this is the exclusion of science. Yeah. So scientists aren't being heard. Where consumers can't be heard. Science is obviously not getting through to the upper echelons of the WHO.
I disagree. Science is definitely getting through. No, I disagree. Science definitely gets through. We are not talking about science at the back of a cigarette box, pardon the pun, or on a lucky packet somewhere. We're talking about Cochrane systematic reviews, the Cochrane Library. We're talking about the National Academy of Science, Technology and Medicine. We're talking about the Royal College of Physicians. We're talking about a whole host of very respected, highly respected, huge amount of credibility talking about these products. We're talking about 15 past presidents of the Society of Research on Nicotine and Tobacco have issued a paper. When you're meaning to tell me that none of these delegates, or the Secretariat, or the World Health Organization have had no knowledge of this science? Are you meaning to say that all of those institutions and all of that research is to do with tobacco or being sponsored by tobacco? Come on. This is nuts. It's absolute nuts.
It's discrimination and censorship.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it reminds me, you mentioned that Royal College of Physicians wasn't included in the Todd Reg 9 report either, and considering that's from 2016 was a pioneering paper, Nicotine Without Smoke, and they've ignored that as well.
But let's be honest. In 1962, Smoking and Health was the report that literally brought on the genesis of the tobacco control. It was the consensus around the health implications around smoking. Royal College of Physicians brought that out in 1962. That's 18 months prior to the
CDC report.
The
General Surgeon report.
The Surgeon General of the United States. We're talking about the same schools and the same societies that have been working on this particular product for decades. And in 2016, nicotine and health, nicotine without smoke, highlighted this has the potential of 5% when compared to combustible tobacco. I don't believe they don't understand this. I don't believe that it hasn't got through to them. I think there's something else driving this, and it's really, really concerning because lives are at stake.
You wanted to join in there?
The thing is, I've been thinking of the reason of Article 5.3, and I get back always to that article because that was, I believe, the reason I was excluded and why INCO is excluded, and everybody is excluded from the FCTC. And the thing is, this article is an expression of one of the obligations that derive from the right to health, which is the obligation to protect. the states have the obligation to protect and to fulfill, but they also have the obligation to respect, and to respect what? The rights and freedoms that derive from the right of health, and they are not doing so. So it is questionable that they are really pursuing health, because in one of the panels today, someone said or questioned the results of the anti-tobacco fight in general terms and regarding the number of smokers in the world. And I mean, they might not understand it, but the best decisions cannot derive from impositions. They come from debate, and there cannot be debate if all the parties are not in the discussion.
Okay, as we're coming short on time now, let's look to the future. This COP, we've noticed, is, because I've been to a few COPs, but the pressure on harm reduction products has never been stronger than this. I mean, it's almost like they've forgotten about tobacco entirely. The agenda is almost exclusively about crushing safer alternatives than smoking. There's a little bit about tobacco advertising and stuff like that, but there's very little else. And I think they were throwing all their eggs in one basket as this to try and crush it. Now, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of this conference, but say you know, they don't make too many decisions and it gets pushed onto COP11. How much will that be because the science and because public opinion is starting to get through these delegations? And what might sort of be the occurrence of that when we come to COP11, wherever that may be in 2 years? I'll go, if you want, just a minute or so each along the panel and just look to the future. What do you think the future is going to hold with COP11 after this one?
Well, I don't know. We need to be optimistic, that's definitely. And what would look like? I don't know. I wanted to add that we have in Croatia action plan for 20-something years about decreased smoking. And in 20 years, they did zero public health campaigns. Zero public health campaigns and zero decrease in smoking. So that's the people that are now deciding about this subject. So I don't know. For me, we need to push further and never give up about this subject. And I think it will be in a short or medium term period, it can stay like this. So I hope you know, we will fight back.
I would love to see the Secretariat of the CTC to understand that if they go and they keep this route of exclusion, their decisions will always lack the legitimacy that derives from the democratic inclusion and from considering all the parties. I really hope, as now is being discussed, at least mentioned the tobacco harm reduction term in the FCTC, I really hope that for COP11, they understand that unless they include all the parties, especially consumers, the affected ones, legitimacy of their decisions is going to be, or should be, really questioned.
Yeah, New Zealand's success in reducing people, the number of people smoking, 50% reduction in 5 years, it's occurred in spite of the WHO and the FCTC, not because of the WHO and the FCTC. So I think that unless we start seeing, you know, them embracing the science more and actually thinking about how we can save more lives and stop people getting sick, then we might see a divergence from, you know, those countries that are willing to engage in tobacco harm reduction and those that are willing to keep, you know, following the FCTC. And so, you know, I work for a taxpayer organisation. I care about saving taxpayers' money. And if we don't see a mindset shift from the WHO, we will be probably campaigning next year for New Zealand not to send delegates. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. We should be pursuing our own policies that are based on science and based on evidence and based on reducing harm and saving lives. And so, you know, I hope other countries can follow in our lead, and I hope we can continue to be world leaders and expand the number of harm reduction products that we have available.
That's a very good point. I mean, there have been increasing calls to defund the WHO. If they're not going to listen to anyone, what's the point of giving money? Yeah, exactly. And last word to you, Kurt.
I think what I'm getting a general sense at this particular COP, there was a bit of panic in terms of trying to rush things through, trying to get these things, and that, that panic could be based on the fact that reality is catching up, or the science is catching up to the reality. So they're getting this last gasp or last attempt to try throw the kitchen sink at this. So I'm quietly optimistic that COP11 we'll start seeing some of these articles being rehashed again and again and again. But, I think the World Health Organization, and particularly the FCTC, needs to look at the examples of New Zealand and the UK. And it's not just because of their strategies and their how they've adopted harm reductions, especially even Sweden. Sweden's a very good example. But it wasn't just that. Is that all these three countries have implemented some phenomenal strategies based on FCTC's guidelines. There's a number of articles in there, Article 14, Article 15. There's a whole host of work that these countries have done to get to a point. And then these countries then realize that we are plateauing there, and harm reduction is the next step to push this further. Unfortunately, coming from an LMRC, a lot of these articles and a lot of these measures haven't been implemented. So we haven't even got out the starting blocks. And we're already seeing the World Health Organization wanting to remove something that could assist them even further in reducing smoking rates in those countries. And we all heard these stats. 80% of the world's people that smoke happen to be in these locations. So I think there needs to be a change, a mindset change around how do we support these countries in achieving, or at least having those certain articles and those strategies in place, outside of just having a policy or a law, actually doing and assisting in this. And I'm hoping that will be the focus, but we'll see.
Well, that's a nice positive way to end. And the one thing we will say is that no matter how they exclude us, I think I can speak for consumers all over the world. We're not going anywhere. We're still going to be making these points, and they should take note. And also, just another positive note, I mentioned it earlier in the week, Alex Wodak, who's fought the WHO on drugs harm reduction for years, he said, I've seen it all before, everything exactly the same. In the end, they had to take notice of us, and now the WHO endorses harm reduction for drug use. So who knows? Maybe we're at the nadir and we're going to be going the other way soon, as you see.
At what cost?
Oh, true, yeah. So anyway, thank you very much to Philip, Thomas, Connor and Kurt for another great panel. And I think it's 3 o'clock. The next one, the effects of prohibition. I think we all know the effects of prohibition. We've got a good panel there. Unfortunately, Dr. Rohan, I think, has gone sick. But we have Juan Jose Sirion from Mexico, Adam Hoffer from USA, Pablo or Jonas from Argentina, and once again we'll have a very, very top quality substitute for Dr. Rohan on the panel. As soon as I know who that is, I'll let you know. But we'll see you again in about 10 minutes.
Are we live? Okay. You want me to sit next to boys?
Thank you.
Okay, you're
I don't
welcome.
bite.
I do. That's the
Okay.
problem.
No problem. I can stand it.
We're on. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Good Cop, Bad Cop. Those of you that don't know me, I've always been introduced as Maria P., but my name is Maria Papayawanu Duick. I always say the Duick part because it's my Croatian part. I'm here today with a lovely, lovely, and very handsome group of experts here at Good Cop, Bad Cop, and we are going to talk about the effects of prohibition. So let's just go over what the lovely WHO has said. The WHO recommends that governments ban tobacco harm reduction products, yet history from across the globe finds bans have never worked in achieving public health goals. This panel, we're going to explore the various governments around the world who are following the WHO's advice and what issues prohibition presents for countries and notably their taxpayers. This panel, we're going to explore better policies governments can take to address concerns with THR while ensuring adults access to safer alternative to cigarettes. On a side note, I really hope that the delegation from Health Canada is listening and paying attention here. We have some really good starting points for tobacco harm reduction when it comes to vaping, and we really need I need my government to step up, the delegation at WHO to step up and continue and emphasize the voice for THR. So let's introduce who we have here. Right next to me is Juan Jose. Is it Sirion? Sirion from Mexico. We also have Jonas Torrico from Argentina, Adam Hoffer from the USA, and Tim, what's your last?
Andrews.
Oh my goodness, sorry, it was Tim Andrews. And I think with the accent, we know he's from the UK. Am I wrong?
I'm an Australian who now lives in DC.
Oh my God. He's, okay guys, obviously I don't know anything. An Australian who now lives in DC. And we have Adam Hoffer from the US. So did I get that one right, or are you from Canada?
You got it right on.
Okay. So let's just start talking first about what regulations each of you have in your own country. So Juan, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much. We've been experiencing something very unique because the ban started with presidential decrees instead of being done by legislators as the law is supposed to be done. So with these decrees, a part of the executive power in Mexico make the prohibition of the commercialization of these devices. What happened next is that the Supreme Court ruled as unconstitutional these kind of prohibitions. So we have a market very strange where some people who got injunctions against this decree are able to commercialize these products with these court orders. But in general, there is a prohibition. And as you may know, this Monday, our humanitarian president tried to put a law where he is making a prohibition of vapes in our constitution, just comparing them as harmful as fentanyl. So that's what we have right now. He is not going to get it, but he's trying to do it.
Okay, that's like a whole other discussion about human rights as well, and how that can be a slippery slope for everything. And I'm sorry, because that's like disgusting. Absolutely. So who do we have next? Here we go. Oh, Jonas.
Yes.
Do you want us to tell us a little bit of what's going on in Argentina?
Yes, of course. Algo importante que hay que remarcar sobre Argentina es que la Argentina no ratificó el acuerdo con la FCTC. En Argentina lo que sucede es que está prohibida la comercialización del vapeo por un organismo del Estado, que sería como la FDA Argentina. Esto significa que está prohibido por una resolución de un organismo del Estado. Esto significa que el Congreso argentino jamás prohibió, mediante una ley, la comercialización del vapeo. Y esto lo que abre es una gran oportunidad para que se pueda impulsar desde el Congreso argentino la regularización de este comercio. Y algo que creo que es importante utilizar este espacio es para incentivar a todo el sector privado que trabaja en Argentina, en donde tiene más de 1 millón de usuarios del vapeo, que se organicen y que impulsen eventos como este en Argentina para poder llevar esta causa al Congreso y que se convierta en una ley nacional y se pueda legalizar el vapeo en Argentina.
Thank you, and we're now going to have one.
I will try to
Try-
summarize in English what
summarize.
he said. In Argentina, the prohibition doesn't come, like in Mexico, from the legislative power, but from one of the administrative powers that is equivalent to the FDA in Argentina. So he thinks that there is a very good opportunity right now to try to check how the legislative power can regulate these products in the best terms possible, because the people is linked to this idea of having them regulated.
Okay, thank you. Am I on? Okay, perfect. And then we're going to move on to Tim, who can talk about Australia. And if you don't know what's going on in Australia, do you even vape, bro? Sorry, just had to say that. It was actually kind of fun because it's horrifying
It is.
what's happening.
So the Australian government has de facto prohibition on vaping. Technically, you're allowed to have if you go to a doctor and you get a prescription and you go to a special pharmacy, you can technically have a legal vape product. But in reality, who's going to go to a doctor, get a prescription every time they want to, when they want to purchase vapes? So there is de facto prohibition, which is why you still have well over 1 million people using black market products illegally in Australia. And the government has many, many times already said, we have prohibition, but we're going to have even harder prohibition. Oh, that failed. We're going to have even more prohibition. And that failed. I think we've now announced that vapes are being banned 5 different times over the last 2 years. So the definition of insanity, quite literally. And as a result, you have, in the first 8 months of last year, because the thing is, the people who control the illicit vape market are not nice people. They are not your sort of legal vape store owner who cares about his customers, who wants people to quit smoking through vaping. It's international criminal syndicates, which is why in the first 8 months of last year, you saw 60 arson attacks against vape stores and tobacconists. 60 arson attacks and 2 murders. Once again, 60 arson attacks and 2 more murders, according to a statement by the Australian Federal Police, because of the gangland wars that are happening around illicit tobacco and increasingly illicit vaping. This is becoming a huge crime issue because organised crime can essentially get away with these sort of products, but the penalties are relatively lax. The market is huge, as that over 1 million Australians vape. You can buy them in any convenience store. And so there is this incredible turf war over the nicotine trade. If you need to, so on one hand, you have law-abiding people who end up smoking cigarettes because they don't want to break the law. Law-abiding people who go to the great inconvenience of needing to go to a doctor, getting a prescription, finding a doctor who actually understands it in the first place, who will give you a prescription. There are only a dozen or so doctors around Australia who will do this. But in most cases, it is black market products. You are funding criminal syndicates. We know from the Federal Police that the people doing this are involved in drug trafficking and are involved in sex trafficking, are involved in... we know that illicit tobacco, at least, was used to fund terrorism in the region. Jumeirah Islamiyah, which attacked us, in particular, was linked to tobacco terrorism from Australia. And we know tobacco was, black market tobacco from the US was used to funnel Hamas and other Hezbollah and other things. This is all a matter of record. So when you have arson and people dying and being killed as a result of prohibition, when you have people still smoking as a result of prohibition, when you have products that could well contain, I mean, there's no quality control on illicit products. You don't have the safety standards, you don't have the regulatory standards that you do with licit ones. You don't necessarily know what's going into them. I mean, in the US, the issue with Avali, which was all illicit cannabis products, we saw. And none of them was a legal nicotine vape. So this is a huge problem, and Australia just keeps doubling down on these failed policies of prohibition, despite the fact that they are causing significant harm. Australia hasn't embraced harm reduction, it has embraced harm maximization, because I can't think of a Western country that is causing more harm to people than Australia is at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but we shall move on to Adam from the USA, which I think people misunderstand. Everybody thinks vaping is legal in the US. Adam?
So the United States, it's a complicated story. Like most other policies, the vaping market, vapes are not illegal in the United States. However, at the same time, not all vapes are legal. So the story in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration is charged and tasked with authorizing what nicotine and tobacco products can be sold legally in the United States. There are no laws in any of the 50 states that explicitly have statewide bans nor a federal ban on vaping. However, not all vaping products have been authorized for sale in the United States. So what you're left with is this mix of a legal market and a quasi-illicit market. The real issue in the United States right now is that the FDA refuses to authorize flavored tobacco products, and it turns out that flavored vaping products are really popular. And so what has happened is, particularly in the disposable vaping market, the FDA has not authorized these products for sale, yet they still arrive in the United States and are sold by vape shops and other tobacco outlets across the country. In the disposable vaping market, estimates range from about 60 to 97.9% of the disposable market as being products that are not legally authorized for sale in the United States. So these end up being illicit products sold across the country and consumed by consumers, even though there is no legal standard for the sale of them, nor enforcement or any regulatory standards, because the products aren't authorized for sale in the first place. So you end up with this mixed market of legal and illicit products that really functions poorly as a market, because that's not how markets are designed to operate.
Thank you. Oh my God, they make it so difficult. Not you guys, but governments make it so difficult. And I just want to remind everybody that listening to what Tim said of what's going on with the arson attacks, with the illicit trade, with all that, this is WHO's goal. This is their end game. Australia is their golden child of regulations. This is what the WHO is hoping for. So I think we need to remember that whatever we're at, that's what they want, because then they think they're okay. We're okay, we handled it, but we're not going to worry about the sex trafficking. We're not going to worry about the arson. We're not going to worry about the murders, because really, can the WHO regulate a crime syndicate? So I want to take some, I'll start with one here, is what do you think the effects of prohibition will be? Because we know, like, just less than 100 years ago, it was the roaring 20s and booze was illegal. Okay.
Thank you. When I hear my partners in this table, at first I thought that low-income countries would have different results with prohibitions, but what I'm hearing right now looks like we have a very similar situation in both first world countries and low-income countries. So I would like to summarize what I think are the main effects of prohibition. The first thing is and I think is the most important, there is no security guaranteed for consumers. There's no quality control, there's no minimum requirements for production, and this is what users can buy when there is a prohibition. Second, there are no tax collection to help government with resources to make budgets for people aware of effects or diseases when use any kind of substances. The next effect is there is no data recollection or statistics about numbers of users, ages, preferences, and shopping habits, so the government could know what to do to control the consumption. There is no public health strategy involving harm reduction. If they are banned, then there's no strategy. Another thing is that there is no possibility to reduce expenses in public health, as the same number of people will get sick by the use of tobacco if they cannot access to less harmful options. Then the money spent for public health is going to be the same. In difficult countries, like I thought low-income countries, but I heard from Tim that in Australia it's almost the same. In difficult countries, there is a lot of risk that organized crime and drug cartels try to control the illicit market with all the crime and the violence involved. I'm from Mexico, you know what's the situation with the cartels, so you can imagine what is happening with these prohibitions. But the worst part that I think is happening with the prohibitions is that the human rights are clearly violated in the process. The free development of personality, the right to have true information based on facts and science, and not only perceptions and ideology, and the right to exercise freely the decision of what is the kind of health anyone would like to achieve in any possible way, personally and individually. What is happening is that the point of view of the delegates that right now are in COP is that they will try to impose a style of life to all of the other people who doesn't want to live like that. They are trying to say that health is not only a right, but they think is kind of a responsibility. And that's not true. Anyone can choose whatever they want to do with their lives, and with that said, then they cannot impose the way of life they are trying to do. The prohibitions are always attempted against human rights.
Thank you. Jonas, in Argentina, what would you say would be a good first step to ensuring that whatever's going on right now, we start changing and being more respectful and embracing tobacco harm reduction? Like, where do you see the first step in your country?
Bien, en Argentina hoy en día hay pocas estadísticas con respecto al vapeo. Hoy nosotros somos una organización de políticas públicas que en Argentina se ocupa de impulsar y analizar causas, llevarlas al Congreso y lograr que eso se convierta en una ley nacional. Y algo que hemos visto con los expertos que estamos compartiendo en este evento es que hay poca información cierta y concreta de lo que sucede en Argentina. Eso significa que si no se conoce, no se puede impulsar. Entonces, algo que es lo que ya he estado hablando con diferentes miembros de asociaciones de vaping en Argentina y otros países es que se debe comenzar a impulsar desde el sector privado. Desde el sector que se comercializa vaping en Argentina, se tiene que estar impulsando este tipo de foros, se tiene que estar impulsando informes, se tiene que estar impulsando análisis para llevar información concreta y real a los tomadores de decisiones. A partir de generar esos primeros acercamientos con información real, vamos a poder comenzar a cambiar la mentalidad de las personas que hoy deciden si el vapeo en Argentina es legal o ilegal.
Okay, we're going to do a little like a synopsis, a précis, cliff notes.
Yes.
These are called WAN notes.
Yes. Uh, he thinks that there are a few statistics related to vaping, and when talking with the experts in this event, he knows that there are not a lot of information. And he's also saying that he works with associations that try to regulate different kind of things. And he thinks that the possible regulation must start coming from private parties that can feed information to regulators, so at first can change their mind of the perception of vaping, and then try to get some regulations about it.
Thank you. Tim, I have like so many questions because growing up, I used to think of Australia as the coolest place on the planet. Like, I'm being straight up here. Like, Australians laid back, really a bro culture, for lack of a better word. We're really about all this. And to see such a total ban on a product that would actually and does actually help people live a better quality of life. How did this, like, where did the turn go? How did this happen? I feel like it came out of nowhere, like, as an outsider.
I think that if you look at the history of public health in Australia, it's always been the petri dish from which bad ideas try and get exported to the rest of the world. You sort of try something, it fails in Australia, and then the public health cheers, and it then fails everywhere else. So you see Australia has some of the highest alcohol taxes in the world. It doesn't do anything to reduce problem drinking, but we have some of the highest alcohol taxes in the world. You saw the complete failure of plain packaging in Australia, which was government's solution, as I mentioned in the previous panel for those who were here. Public health decided that the silver bullet to stop cigarette smoking was plain packaging. It failed in Australia. In fact, it failed so badly that cigarette use increased in the year after plain packaging was instituted, because so of course it then moved to other countries in the world. Australia has the highest cigarette taxes in the world. It's over $40 for a packet of cigarettes. And you see, again, all of these sort of things fail. So you can go back and look at the history of public health in Australia, and I think everybody knew that this was where it was coming. And the reason is, as to why, I mean, it's a combination of the incredibly large amount of funding from the taxpayer that public health gets in Australia, but I mean, it gets that in the United States as well. Generally, most countries where science is dependent on government largesse, they get the sort of outcomes that suit a certain agenda. But I do think that because Australia has a relatively small population out of the Anglosphere countries, it's been deliberately targeted by international people with an agenda against.
Like who? I mean, not who, but who?
Well,
World Health Organization.
Well, yes, but I think it's generally the entire public health movement. Like, I won't actually blame Bloomberg for Australia. Like, I'll blame Bloomberg for virtually every other country. I don't think that he's doing it. I think it's the public health movement at all that all gets together and says, let's try things in Australia. And once you crack the first country, especially if it's a Western country, it's very easy to export the model. So you see that this happening. And so people also say Australia is a free country. It's not really. It never has been. You saw we had the strongest COVID restrictions out of any Western country considerably. You see this in a lot of other ways. And people think, well, Australia's a country of prisoners. You should be free. No, Australia was founded by prison guards. The only prisoners who did well were those who sucked up to the authorities so much that they were able to get special privileges. More prison guards came to Australia than prisoners. Being an obedient sort of law, sort of big government person is Australia's DNA. This entire Crocodile Dundee myth is a myth, and it is not like that in reality at all.
Oh, man. I'm sorry to have... I love you. That was like the most passionate thing I think we've heard thus far. I do believe that, like, I'm looking at my public health officials in Canada because I feel that there's one in particular, I call him Robbie, from Cancer Society. He just wants to outdo Australia. So just so you know, we're the first to have warnings on individual cigarettes. So when you smoke a cigarette in Canada, you will know that it causes impotence. Every time you take that drag, the message is there. Smoking causes impotence.
The thing is, all of these things, like all
Are
of the
dumb.
studies show that like none of these things work. Like most health warnings, like people know smoking is bad for you. Having graphic health warnings don't work. You know, one of the they also have unintended consequences. Like I know in Australia, people were trying to get the packets which had the worst graphic health warning on it because they thought that the most gruesome one was pretty cool to have. There was a really horrific one where they had to recall, and this is actually genuinely sad, but one of the graphic health warnings was on tobacco was something like it can reduce fetus size. Like it's bad for unborn babies because it reduces fetus size. Young women who are pregnant started smoking as a result because they thought it would make childbirth easier. Like this is completely like known, and they had to stop that one because of the unintended consequences of these sorts of things. So like everything Australia can get wrong, and again, Australia still has. You saw when vaping came in, in the US, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Canada, smoking rates kept going down, 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 down. They haven't in Australia. Despite us having double, triple the amount of taxes, despite us having plain packaging, smoking rates in Australia have flatlined.
I think it's because you have too many leaders as former jail guards, and they're too stubborn to listen to anybody.
Well, yes, because they've I mentioned this in the last panel. They've invested their entire life's work into a failed model that doesn't work, and so they have this psychological block that they're refusing to accept reality that the free market came up with a solution that was far better than anything that they did. Like, yes, as I said, sorry for repeating myself for those who are listening to the earlier panel, but when I can understand when your entire life's work has proven to be an absolute failure, why you want to still cling on to it and not accept a better solution. But the problem is that people are dying as a result of your bloody psychological problems. And you should let go of your issues and embrace something that we know works.
Okay, let's a round of applause for that. Like, seriously, and you guys at home watching, totally. Adam, you're up next. Let's talk the USA, because to me, the United States, free market, we can do whatever we want. We're the United States. Let's be the first. Let's do it. Like, American made, so must be good. And a lot of these e-liquids, and let's be honest, a lot of this industry in North America is based in the United States. And it's made by good people when you think about this. So I just don't understand how they could be so cruel to United States small business owners and people as well. I think there's two to this, because when you affect the small business, the consumer isn't guaranteed a product because the product can't get safer because they're so worried of them getting removed from market.
I think if you talk to business owners or any of these manufacturers in the United States, all they want is nationwide legal status, because they want to innovate. They want to make better and safer products. I think you can talk to, if you go to talk to any tobacco company in the United States, they all recognize that the future of nicotine consumption is not the combustible cigarette. They still sell them, they still manufacture them, but they want to innovate and make new products that are safer for their consumers. And to a large extent, they have. They've come up with amazing devices that consumers really like. The thing that's most frustrating is that, as you mentioned, in this land of the free home of innovation, that these products are not allowed to be sold in some cases. It's just maddening. The Food and Drug Administration really puts an asterisk on what we call permissionless innovation. You're not allowed to do permissionless innovation in the nicotine and tobacco space because you, by definition, must ask permission from the Food and Drug Administration to sell nicotine or tobacco products in the United States. And if they don't say yes, then you don't get to legally sell your products. And this process of getting approval in the United States can take years and years and millions upon millions of dollars, which is why you don't see even more innovation in this space. It's extremely frustrating.
Tim, you wanted to add to that something?
The gross stupidity of the US system, it gets even worse because there's technologies now to try and prevent youth use, where you can use, Bluetooth technologies. If you purchase something, it has to have it. It's illegal to use them in the US because they haven't gone through the bureaucratic madness of the FDA. So there are technologies to prevent, everyone says, think of the children. Here's a technology that will stop youth use. No, sorry, you can't sell that. This is madness in the US. And also, of course, the fact that when you make something illicit, do you think that your person selling illicit vapes is going to check IDs for underage use if they're selling illegal products? So, for instance, when I had to use my passport in the US, I didn't have a driver's license, so I couldn't purchase Juul. Because Juul, the way they work is they scan your ID, they scan your driver's license, and if you had a, at the reputable places, like this was a voluntary agreement Juul came up with. So I couldn't purchase Juul. I could go to my local convenience store and purchase an illicit problem because I would never, etc. So, I mean, this is a little bit of weird story for me, but like if you're a kid, your illegal place will easily sell something to you, but your reputable place won't. So everything that the government is saying they want to do, they're getting the exact opposite outcome in the United States. But yeah, it's just madness that they can't do technology to prevent youth use.
I hear you. Listen, I mean, I know in Canada, and I think a lot of consumers feel this way because I feel the vibe on Twitter is we begged for regulations a little bit too early. Because in Canada, as soon as we got those regulations, big tobacco came in, as did tobacco control. So at the same time that our regulations in Canada went legal, that was 2018, big tobacco came in, tobacco control came in, and the mood changed. There was a lot more. I know that we feel like we're at the point where we need regulations, but do you think we should be giving up so much to be regulated? I know in Canada we gave up nicotine strength. We've given up, in my province, I can't put the name of my business on the store more than once. I have to have my windows blacked out. I can't advertise. So here's the thing is that we want to be regulated, but then we're getting regulated out of being known we're a vape shop. So what is too much? What is enough? Like just having flavors isn't enough anymore. We can't just focus on saving flavors. There's more to vaping than those flavors. Juan, go for it.
Yeah, the first thing is that sometimes the politicians think that making a law is going to change reality, and that's not going to happen. So when we have some kind of need of regulation, the true democratic governments should only intervene in the lesser things about freedom of the people. The freedom is the essential part of any legal system, and the prohibitions should be the less that there could be to have this freedom. So when you said about milligrams of nicotine, there should be no limit. When you said the bottles of e-liquid, there should be no limit. You know, when we are giving up, no, okay, please let me sell this in this place and then I will have a limit of 20 milligrams, then we're giving up our freedom. And that is what we are not supposed to do. The market is going to dictate what is the limits that we have under some regulations that just have to be for the safety of the users.
Thank you. Jonas, do you think Argentina should be giving up to keep? Like, is there anything that, like, what we're talking about is sometimes we just hand over everything and then they take little by little with every new regulation. Trust me, Tim, we're almost there in Canada as you are in Australia. Every new regulation.
You started so well.
You know what? We started I have to say this. We started so beautifully in Canada. And then, as I said, 2018, tobacco got in. So tobacco control came because they're like what? Siamese twins, where one goes, the other goes. And tobacco control made a mockery out of this product. And, you know, the regulations are tough right now for us. Like 20 milligrams, a lot of people have gone back to smoking or dual users. And at the end of the day, it's all about, we worry so much about flavors, but we don't worry about, vaping is more than flavors. That's what I want to say.
Yo creo que Actualmente estamos ante una gran posibilidad en Argentina de lograr que el vapeo sea legal. Estamos ante una nueva administración que tiene otra postura, que tiene tradición y que a su vez no comparte los ideales que tal vez han sido la norma a nivel mundial. Estamos ante un gobierno, que es el presidente Javier Milei, que está abierto al libre mercado, está abierto a la propiedad privada, está abierto a la libertad de elección, y creo que es algo que hay que aprovechar. De este congreso nosotros estamos llevando mucha información para comenzar a trabajar con diputados y senadores nacionales para lograr que se empiece a impulsar esta causa en Argentina. Nosotros queremos que Argentina se convierta en uno de los países de Sudamérica en donde el vaping se convierta en una actividad regulada, en donde pueda haber, donde por un lado se pueda regular el mercado y eso haga que, por ejemplo, los menores no puedan acceder, que es algo que hoy no está sucediendo, y por otro lado, a su vez, tenga ingresos tributarios. Y lo que esperamos es que con esos ingresos tributarios se utilicen para bajar otros impuestos, como por ejemplo el IVA de los productos de la leche o el IVA de los alimentos. Entonces, tenemos un mercado en Argentina desregulado que no cobra impuestos, y bueno, si lo legalizamos y lo regulamos, podemos tener mayores ingresos y podemos bajar impuestos con esos nuevos ingresos.
Okay. He thinks that right now there is a great possibility that in Argentina could be make vaping legal. With this new government, he's thinking that this new president, Javier Milei, does not share the position or the point of view that the past presidents were thinking about. So he thinks that he could get a good regulation where there's a prohibition to minors, and with the money that can be get via taxes, they can, for example, diminish the taxes of some food like milk and other things, and with the money that they can get with taxes, it can be used for different things in their country.
Okay, thank you. Tim, I'm going to ask you this question, then we're going to move on to Adam, because I want you to think about it. You write the Australian regulations, and then you come back and share them with us. But we're going to go to, I want you to think about this, because I just don't want to ask you off the cuff. I want you to take a moment to do this. Adam, what I'm trying to realize is how are they marking these PMTA approvals? Like, are they looking at a scientific analysis? Are they caring about what's inside of these vapes? Like, or are they just like saying, okay, well, thank you, Biden or Obama or Trump, whoever gave the order to say, we're never approving a vape, because I think you've approved 20 out of like 1 gazillion. Like, on the inside looking out, or the outside looking in, what is their rhyme and reason?
That's my favorite question. That's the number one thing I wanted to talk about coming into this panel is the pre-market authorization process for tobacco products from the Food and Drug Administration is about as clear as mud. And nobody understands it. External reviews of the FDA's process have come back and said that there's no clarity here, right? So the Food and Drug Administration says that their job in these authorizations is to promote public health. So in order to have a product approved, you need to demonstrate in your application, the thousands and thousands of pages of your application, that your product promotes public health. Now, what does that mean? We have no idea. There's no formula. There's no bar you have to get over. There's no set criteria that the FDA can say, well, you've clearly demonstrated X, Y, and Z. And nobody knows. There are meetings behind closed doors, and then sometimes months or years later, the FDA will issue a decision. And as we've seen, when decisions don't go in favor of products or companies, those companies often sue the FDA. And the FDA has found itself on multiple occasions essentially with its pants down in courts when the judge asks, why did you deny this? they don't have an answer. Essentially, Juul won their first case, a stay of execution, if you will. They are winning their first case in court because the FDA acknowledged that the FDA itself did not review the scientific application portion of their application. So the FDA is not reviewing the science the way that we would expect the science organization to look at the science.
Okay, and I also want to point out, because you said that they have to demonstrate that this is good for public health, right? However, and I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, just let me know. But from my understanding, based on what I've read, and again, I'm Canadian, so I'm not American, not really in depth on this, is don't you have to file an application? So if you have a 60 milligram bottle that's nicotine free, you have to file one application, and then if you have 3 milligrams, you have to file another.
Yes.
Does the promotion of health change on the strength of nicotine? Like, it's a product. It's not like a strawberry flavor would not promote them. Like, in my life, yes, a strawberry flavor I would use a lot more than, say, a lychee, because I'm not a fan of lychee. But that would be personal. But how are they making everybody fill out different strengths, different sizes, different flavors? Like, a brand's a brand.
So
it is a product, e-liquid.
For the FDA, the SKU, right, the item-specific, every product needs its own application. So every different size, different application. Every different flavor, different application. And the FDA they have split hairs finally enough where they have approved your basic tobacco flavor, but not the other flavored products of this, essentially what is the same product. Their justification for doing that so far has been that the big boogeyman here is youth smoking and youth vaping, so that they say that they are concerned that the flavors will attract youth vapors, though they have yet to demonstrate with data that any sort of cost-benefit analysis to justify the fact that they haven't permitted flavors.
Oh my God, I just really hope that kids one day think tobacco flavor is cool, and then we can get back to strawberry. Okay, Tim, we're all waiting. I am, because then I literally want to do a show with you. Like, I think, imagine the two of us on a show with our passion and our accents.
How I would run it in Australia. Well, look, I mean,
I said, how would you make the regulations, not run Australia, but you go for it.
Did I say that? I didn't mean to say that. How would I run Australia? Leave everyone alone. That's how I'd run Australia. It's probably too much for Australian politicians to accept science. I'd be happy for them to just accept basic fundamental reality at this point. But look, first of all, you would legalise products without a prescription. You would recognise the importance of harm reduction. For the sake of reality, I would have a basic set of product standards. I think that we can't simply say, my political ideology may be more libertarian, but realistically, we should have some basic standards. But I wouldn't do regulation above that. Secondly, I would accept from a taxation perspective that we shouldn't be taxing products that are saving people's lives. So any sort of idea to tax them at a high level, I would definitely not support. But thirdly, I would also say, we'd focus a lot about vaping here, but this is only one form of nicotine use that's a reduced risk product. I mean, you do have snus, you have oral tobacco, you have tobacco pouches. I mean, snus has been responsible for Sweden becoming essentially a smoke-free country. Nicotine pouches, which are illegal in Australia, and a lot of chemical analysis actually have fewer chemicals in them than nicotine gums, which you can get prescribed and things like that. The difference is that people want to use them, and they work. So I would have a tobacco policy that actually legalises these products in Australia, because they're completely illegal even with a prescription at the moment. So the advantage of a policy is that it allows people as many different options as possible to quit. Some people quit with snus, some people quit with oral tobacco pouches, some people want to quit with vaping. Let people have the choice to choose something that works for them, have the most basic system of regulation through quality control. Like, you don't want to have something in there that will kill you with one puff. But once you know that those sort of basic standards are in place, I would just leave people to quit smoking how they want and recognize that adults do actually have agency. There's something else that's often lost in this debate, this entire concept that, you know, people should be free to choose these sort of products if they want.
Tim Andrews for Prime Minister. I know he has a Prime Minister because we still have a king, because we have one too. Okay, I'm going to leave this the last question because this is being like a bee in my bonnet. Is that, I don't even know if that's a saying. But all the regulations.
It's a saying in Australia, right?
Is it? Okay, good. It's a saying in Canada too. So it's a bee in your bonnet, which means a bee in your hat, which means that would be really annoying if you're wearing a hat and there's a bee in it, right? Why are all the regulations all about what's on the outside of the bottle, but nothing about the inside of the bottle? And that really bothers me because we have made, like even when you just said the PMTA, they don't look at the scientific data. In Canada, I can tell you that we debated that when you explain a flavor, if it's on a list, you're allowed to have, let's say, a vanilla custard flavor, but you can't say it's vanilla custard. So we're always, we're worried about what's on the outside of these products, but no one's testing the inside of the product. So the liquid, making sure that the nicotine is the strength that it says, that all these things that I think would be the important things to regulate, and we are getting there in Canada because they have to submit all their molecules, like down to the molecule of what the vaping products is in there. But again, I don't think that means anything. What do you think? Do you think we should be focusing on who's buying it or what we are buying? Like this to me is where the regulations would be accountable for public health. What are we buying that's inside of there opposed to, oh, don't use like fruit on there. That will entice a child. Who wants to start? And this is our last question, guys.
And the other thing, by the way, in terms of regulations, which is what's on the outside, is in the United States and in Australia, it's illegal for a vape store seller to tell somebody a scientific study.
Oh, same with us.
So if a vape store owner would give a customer a published scientific study on harm reduction, that vape store owner would be breaking the law. Like,
our fine is $500,000 and 18 months in a federal, not just the provincial, not the little easy one, a federal prison. These are where our rapists and child offenders stay. And can you imagine me in the line for food? What are you in here for? You know what? My husband got a little too mouthy, so I outed him. How about you? Oh, I told someone that vaping's safer than smoking. Like, literally. But anyways, those are the laws in Canada.
But in terms of what goes in them, yes, and there are ways to do this. One of them, which is, and I think if it was legal, you would see a lot more of, is private certification companies. So if in the cannabis market in most US states which have legalized cannabis, and by the way, cannabis vapes are very often legal for flavors. Nicotine vapes flavors are illegal, but cannabis vapes, oh no, they're every single flavor you can have.
And you can promote them.
And you can.
And we can promote flavored cannabis, but we can't promote flavored vaping.
Yeah, but you see a lot of private certification companies where you will go and they'll test products and you'll get a seal of approval. And I know a lot of people who do use these products who, I don't myself, but they will actually go and check before they go and purchase something, the certification and the provenance and how it's made, those sorts of things. So I think that if a legal market, I mean, that could happen. But if not, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with, like the FDA does food inspections. It makes sure that food, isn't contaminated and won't kill you. I mean, technically it's not the most libertarian thing, but I wouldn't really object to the FDA occasionally inspecting a product and make sure if you say something's in the liquid, what you say is in the liquid is actually in the liquid. Like, fraud is bad, and it can lead to negative consequences. We saw this with illicit cannabis vapes, which were cut with vitamin E acetate, which is what caused Diwali. Like there was this backyard sort of bootleg illicit products they decided to cut cannabis vapes illegally with vitamin E acetate, which is what caused Diwali, and what nicotine vapes ended up getting blamed on, although not a single case of nicotine vapes was responsible for. So, like those sort of basic product standard safety issues, I do think there is a role. I would prefer that it's addressed through private certification as it is with cannabis. But if not, I wouldn't really mind if the FDA got involved. Like, at least the products would be legal.
And I think the problem that we're talking about here with prohibitions is that these sorts of things, these regulations, these inspections, these product quality standards, don't happen with illicit products. Right? So when these products aren't allowed to be sold, the products that are going to enter the market do not have product quality standards. There's no inspection of anything, right? We see that an overwhelming majority of the disposable vaping market, the products that aren't legal for sale, the flavored products in the United States, come from China. And when the FDA issues a ban on a certain product, they finally did some enforcement and said, these products can't be sold anymore. The companies just changed the name, and the exact same products were on shelves under a different name the next day because they can't follow it and they can't track it, and it's easy for these companies to adjust. And if the products were legal and you could regulate those qualities, and if a company fails to meet their standards, they could be forced, they could have fines imposed. We did see this with Juul. The FDA said Juul broke the rules, and what happened? They got fined, there were fees, they had to pay a lot of money. What happened when the illegal Chinese companies broke the rules? Nothing. They can't be fined.
No,
the products get pulled off the shelves and they're back under a different name the next day.
Exactly. Like, I mean, to me, regulations are about, this is harm reduction. Should our goal not be to create a safer product as we move on? And if you think about the products, like I started vaping in 2010, and I think about the juice or the e-liquid, I like to say e-liquid, but the devices, the e-liquid and everything that I've used over the course of these last 14 years, the products have become better and safer. They charge safer. The e-liquids have different standards. In Canada, we would test. There was testing in Canada, but it was self-done. Shop owners would test their e-liquids for different things. So, I mean, yeah, that's the whole goal. If we're going to create a harm reduction product, when we prohibit it, we create a less safe product. What do you think?
No, from the point of view of a Mexican, I cannot answer your question because we have a total prohibition. But, we Mexican advocates here are worried about what is happening in our country. So I would like to make a final statement of what is happening that I told before, that our president wants to make a prohibition explicit in our constitution. So I would like to make a statement about this. In countries like Mexico, where they celebrate that one of the most ignorant and perverse presidents of Mexican history is trying to make prohibitions precisely in the chapter of the Constitution where human rights are recognized and protected, while not enough medicines are available in clinics and institutes, even for children with cancer, is the perfect picture that shows what a prohibition is.
Thank you. That was very powerful. Do you want to just say a few words in closing? And pretend you're talking to your new prime minister. You just look right in that camera.
Algo que podemos decir sobre los problemas de la prevención es que desde ya, al no lograr que el mercado sea regulado, termina teniendo el consumidor productos de baja calidad. Por ejemplo, en Argentina, los aparatos de vapeo se pueden conseguir, pero los líquidos con los que se consume se terminan haciendo en Argentina por laboratorios que no están regulados y que en donde la calidad depende, digamos, de la buena voluntad de la persona que los hace. Entonces, directamente prohibirlos lo que genera es que es poner poner en riesgo a los usuarios que vapean con productos de baja calidad y que no tienen ninguna regulación y que se espera que no hagan un daño mayor. Eso sería. Justo terminé. I just finished.
Oh, you did? Oh my God. Okay. So we're going to get
Okay. what he's saying that the prohibition makes the availability of devices not being clear by any kind of regulation or authority. So the most of the times these products are not having any quality at all. So with these regulations, they would protect the consumers with some regulation to have minimal quality in their making.
Well, I want to say thank you to all our experts over here. Me and Tim should have a show. Like anybody that agrees with that, just drop me a line on Twitter. It's at Papayawanu. I'm sure that's easy for you to smell. And I want to say thank you to the Taxpayers Protections Alliance for creating this space, creating this platform, and allowing people from around the world to step up and speak out on bad regulations, on what's going on, and sharing our stories. And we have up next, David and Martin are doing a regulator watch recap. I call it Reg Watch. Okay, have a good day, guys.
Thank you.